Hey everybody, Ray here, and today I'm going to showcase my approach to the classical Bone Spear build. Many people suggested that it will be weaker in the Season 2, mostly because there were changes to damage buckets, but I think it still worked perfectly well, and I want to focus on how exactly it can approach higher challenges such as Abattoir of Zir. Most of the time in this video I'm going to showcase the basic classical build that I came up with and that I run T100 with, Lilith and stuff like that. And I will also showcase changes that are possible for Abattoir of Zir completion, and I think Bone Spear in its current way should be pretty strong for all types of content. It can also carry 2 people through Lilith, even if the second one will not attack, since the damage is really high. Let's look further into the build itself. So talking about how it works, Bone Spear most of the time utilizes a few different bonuses. The main one should be Enhanced Bone Spear that creates 3 shards when the Bone Spear pretty much destroyed at the end of the fight, and that way you can shotgun enemies with those shards. You can also receive more shards if it critically strikes, so you need to raise your critical strike chance to the maximum. You are also receiving a lot of bonuses from your additional essence, mostly because you can get just pure damage through Ossified Essence passive. That way you can use something like shotgunning with crazy amount of effect. You can see it on the screen right now in the Lilith fight when I'm going back down there, and I'm attacking the enemies on the long distance, so my shards pretty much hitting the enemy immediately. This is the best way to approach single target damage and should work perfectly for most of the cases. Considering that right now we can utilize pretty much strong aspects such as Aspect of Splintering, which can make all the enemies vulnerable and make shards pierce through them, and Aspect of Exposed Flesh, which is amazing to regenerate our essence back, since it has chance to get like 50 essence, which is huge when we are hitting vulnerable enemy. We can pretty much make sure that we can attack almost non-stop in all the situations. Those 2 aspects together grant us so many hits and so many potential to proc it, so it works really good in terms of single target damage and in terms of AoE damage, since our shards pretty much piercing the enemies. We can also utilize such unique items as Deathless Visage, which is pretty good and can help with AoE clear, can help to hit single target if the target stands at place, and make our damage even higher. And T-Bolt's Wheel to get regeneration, to get additional damage bonus, and maximum resource, which works so good in synergy with all Bone Spear Necromancer kit. With all those bonuses, Bone Spear Necromancer is currently one of the most versatile and strong Necromancer builds available, and it should perform so good against all type of content. It can do Lilith carries, it can do tier 100, it will be pretty strong in the Abattoir of Zir too, at least in my opinion. So let's look further into what kind of items we can use, what kind of aspects, and what kind of Paragon will make us the strongest version of the build. So talking about our skills is pretty simple as well. We're using Bone Splinters is a basic attack. I'm not really using it that often, but it's still a pretty nice bonus. We're also taking Acolyte's Bone Splinters because sometimes we can hit the enemies with 3 Bone Splinters and we can receive additional critical strike chance for 4 seconds. It could be really good against big bosses, it could be used here and there, and I think it's definitely worth 1 point, even if you're not using basic pretty often. The only time when I don't think that you need to take this, if you are using Ring of Starless Skies, that way you need to avoid using basics like at all, and then you can pretty much drop it. Moving forward, we are taking 3 points to Imperfectly Balanced and 3 points to Unliving Energy as well. Everything else goes to Bone Spear, and this is our main skill with which we are doing damage. I'm also taking Paranormal Bone Spear, which is pretty much obvious. It gives us beautiful 5% critical strike chance, and it can fire 2 additional bone shards. It's a really strong bonus, and should be in every Bone Spear build. I'm also using 1 point into Hewitt Flash, mostly to generate corpses on bosses and in tough conditions. Moving forward, I'm taking the Blood Mist together with Ghastly Blood Mist, mostly to generate corpses at the start of the fight, or sometimes when you need to shut down suppressors and stuff like this. I think such approach is the best right now, and even considering you can drop Blood Mist in some kind of builds, I still prefer to use it. Moving forward, I'm taking both Death Embrace and Death Reach. I honestly prefer Death Reach since it gives like more damage increase, but Death Embrace pretty much helps to stay alive, and we can survive much better with this. I'm also taking one rank of Decreepify together with Abhorrent Decreepify, mostly to improve our cooldown situations and get some damage resistance out of this, together with Amplify damage, which is just really nice. Moving forward, I'm using only 1 point to Corpse Tendrils since most of the time even cooldown like this is pretty much enough, creating a lot of AoE attacks around us with a lot of splinters, and we don't really need to use Corpse Tendrils that often, so I think 1 point is pretty much enough. I'm also taking Plucked Corpse Tendrils, considering that way we can make enemies vulnerable, but this is not really important. We can also take Blighted Corpse Tendrils to have Blood Orbs on the arena if you prefer it, since enemies will be vulnerable anyway. I'm also using 1 point into Gruesome Mending, since it's a really nice bonus that helps us to stay at full health more often, and it's pretty much important for a Paragon board that contains Imbiber here. Moving forward, I'm taking Serration together with Compound Fracture and Evulsion. I think Evulsion is strongest bonus out of them all, so if you have a few different amulets and trying to pick one, I think the one with Evulsion should be the way. I'm also taking both Standalone and Memento Mori and the Inspiring Leader. I'm also trying to remind you guys that for Inspiring Leader to work, you don't need to have minions. You can pretty much sacrifice them all and it still will work perfectly for you. I'm also taking the Bone Storm since I think it's pretty good skill, mostly for 20% increased critical strike chance at some situations when we are trying to fight against a single target. We can also use the Bone Storm with aspect of Shielding Storm, but I don't think it's mandatory. And it should be used only if you think that there's not enough survivability in your build. And the last but not the least, passive is Ossified Essence. It gives us Bone Skill increased damage for each point of essence above 50 upon cast. This is a really strong bonus, that way we can stack our essence mostly indefinitely and get as much bone skill damage as possible. So this was our skills and we can move forward to the Paragon. So talking about our Paragon, there are certain pretty basic things. We are taking Sacrificial here, mostly to get additional armor, damage and the sweet 10% multiplicative bonus as additional bonus. We're also taking both Resilience and Prime to the right. I'm trying to take a little health right here, but it's not mandatory, you can drop it if needed. And exiting through the top. The first board right here is Bone Graft, which is the most important board for Bone Spear build. To the left I'm taking Essence for critical strike damage and getting all dexterity around it, taking both Shaper of Bone and Erudite. That way we can receive enough resistances to pretty much get to 70 with only Royal Diamonds in our jewelry. That way we don't need anything else and it will just work out. I'm also taking all possible stuff here like Entomb, Reinvigorate, Tenacity and Calcified. Also I'm taking Bone Graft itself since I think it's pretty strong bonus and it should work really good. I'm exiting through the top and taking Scent of Death as the next board. The glyph here is Imbiber, and I think Imbiber is a really good glyph right now, since we are staying as healthy pretty much for all the time. It also gives us beautiful 30% increased potion healing, which is pretty good. We are taking all Willpower and Radius, and that way we can take also Death Marked and Preservation for more armor and more damage. I'm going to the top, taking both Deathbringer and Ruin. I think both of them are pretty nice bonuses together for injured enemies and healthy enemies. So most of the time we will have at least some bonuses. I'm also taking Scent of Death mostly for damage reduction, since we will have corpses nearby for almost all the time. I'm exiting through the top again and taking Flesh Eater as the next board. I don't really think that Flesh Eater itself is mandatory, but you can still use it if you want by dropping your curse and taking Corpse Explosion instead. I'm also taking Erudite again together with targeted, and that way we can get more resistances and more damage. The Glyph here is corporeal for additional bonuses, and I think it works pretty much good. I'm going to the top to take Stifles, since I really think it's a good bonus as well, especially with critical strike damage as the second bonus. And that way we need only 5 points to take Flesh Eater here, so if you will decide that you want it, you can pretty much go there. The last board is to the right, it's Bloodbath, and we are using Exploit here as a glyph. That way we can get some vulnerable damage bonuses, and we don't need anything else right here. I'm still taking Hardened, since we are needing this dexterity and this dexterity here, but we don't really need any bonuses except Exploit itself. So that way it's pretty easy, and Bloodbath should always be the last board since we don't need any bonuses around it. So talking about our items, that's pretty simple. We have a few really good aspects that can pretty much help us with both our damage and survivability. Let's look further into this. We are using Deathless Visage, since it's pretty much still the best helmet for Bone Spear, except from Shaco. It can give us echoes every time when Bone Spear travels, and those echoes could explode, dealing additional damage. It also have really good stats such as maximum essence, damage reduction, and critical strike damage with bone skills. So if you don't have Shaco, Deathless Visage is definitely your choice. Moving forward, we are using Aspect of Disobedience, as usual, on the chest armor. We can roll it for total armor, maximum life, and some kind of damage reductions. Any stats like this will work. At the gloves, we are using Aspect of Grasping Veins, and we need ranks of Bone Spear, Lucky Hit chance, Attack Speed, and Critical Strike chance. Aspect of Grasping Veins is pretty much important, and I would even call it mandatory, since it works really good for the Bone Spear build. We really need 20% of Critical Strike chance that it can provide, so try to get this one as fast as possible. I'm also using T-Bolt's Wheel, mostly to get this sweet bonus primary resource while we are becoming unstoppable. Since we are using Metamorphosis anyway, we are getting a lot of additional primary resource that way. I also think that maximum resource on T-Bolts is really good for Bone Spear Necromancer, since we are trying to stack maximum resource as high as possible. And damage bonus is pretty much good as well. At the boots, I'm using Aspect of Ghostwalker, and it's pretty much mandatory for almost every character in the Season 2, so I think it's the best option here as well. Stats itself should be Essence Cost Reduction, Movement Speed, Intelligence, and Damage Reduction or Dodge. Any of it will work properly. At the Amulet, I'm using Splintering Aspect. I still think that Splintering is a really good option, and it should be put on Amulet. A second option would be to put Grasping Veins on an Amulet, and then Splintering on weapon or on gloves on somewhere else. But I still prefer Splintering here, because I think that it pretty much helps us with ramping up our damage, especially when we don't have Corpse Tenders available. Stats itself on the Amulet would be good for Essence Cost Reduction, some kind of armor, damage and ranks of any bone passive such as Evulsion. At the ring, I'm using a really important aspect of Exposed Flesh. This one is absolutely mandatory for the current Bone Spear. It gives us 10% lucky hit chance to generate 50 essence when hitting a vulnerable enemy. Since all our enemies are always vulnerable, this is the main way how we can maintain our essence, and you should get this one as fast as possible. On the rings itself, I'm stacking lucky hit chance, mostly to proc Exposed Flesh more often, maximum essence, and critical strike chance. Last stat can pretty much differ, it could be critical strike damage, it could be a resource generation, and it could be health, it pretty much depends on your choice. So moving forward with the second ring, I'm using Serration here, since we're stacking a lot of maximum essence and it works pretty good. It gives us a lot of critical strike damage, and I think it's a pretty nice bonus. And the ring itself pretty much works the same fashion, so critical strike chance, lucky hit chance, maximum essence, and the last stat pretty much can be different, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, life, anything like this will work out. Add the wand, and I'm using the wand because I honestly think that the wand is still the best option. 15% of lucky hit chance is great and it can help us to proc the aspect of exposed flesh much more often. So at the wand I'm using all stats, intelligence, vulnerable and core skill damage. We can pretty much change the vulnerable damage to critical strike damage or any other kind like damage to distant enemies or something like this. I'm just using vulnerable since I pretty much rolled it. And the aspect here is aspect of Edge Master, since we're trying to stay on maximum energy for most of the time, and I think it's a really nice damage bonus. I'm using Focus, even considering that shields such as Lindless Wall could be a really good option, I still prefer Focus over it, mostly because of the additional bonuses. I don't have a really good Focus, so don't bother with the stats. Most of the time we want to roll Essence Cost Reduction, Lucky Hit Chance, and chance to restore primary resource since we can't roll it on Glyphs. And the aspect here is pretty unusual, it's the aspect of Inner Calm. We have a few different options right here. We can use aspect of Accelerating for more speed, or we can use aspect of Inner Calm for more damage when you are standing still for at least 3 seconds. I honestly still prefer Inner Calm for single targets such as Uber Lilith fight, such as bosses fights and stuff like this. But if you run more dungeons than you run bosses, you can use aspect of Accelerating instead there, and it will perfectly work for you. So this was the item set, and we can pretty much move forward to the Book of the Dead. So looking at our Book of the Dead, we don't have a lot of different options. For the first sacrifice we are going with Skirmishers, since we need to stack our critical strike chance as high as possible, and this is pretty much not an option, we will need to use skirmishes anyway. At the start of the game, if you're just starting, you can still use defenders for resistances, but in the end game, you will need skirmishes. Moving to the middle one, we are using Cold Sacrifice right here for additional damage to vulnerable enemies, and that was like that from pre-season, nothing has changed, the bonus is still working really good and there is no cool alternatives. We can try to use Shadow here for maximum essence, but it will not give enough. That way, Cold should be a better option. And the last one, I'm using Iron right here for 30% increased critical strike damage, but I would say there's a second option which could be pretty much close. We can use Bone instead for 10% increased attack speed, but I think that Iron will still outperform. However, if you are using two-handed weapon and you need this sweet attack speed bonus, you can pretty much pick the Bone instead, and it will work better for you, especially with such things as Grandfather. For everything else, I'm still preferring Iron, and I think it will give you better results. So talking about our Vampiric powers, I would say it's pretty simple as well. We're obviously using Prey on the Weak since it's a pretty strong bonus right now for vulnerable damage, and we're making all enemies vulnerable anyway. I'm also using Ravenous, since Ravenous right now is completely amazing for any build that can pretty much use the attack speed, and I think the Bone Spear can heavily benefit from it as well. Metamorphosis is mostly here to trigger the regeneration from T-Bolt's Wheel and movement part from Ghostwalker aspect so we can move around faster. It's mostly an utility aspect here, but I still think it's pretty much mandatory. I'm using Resilience here because honestly I think it's really important to stay alive better in higher tiers like tier 100 and stuff like this. If you're not running a lot of tier 100s, you can pretty much swap this one to something like Hemamancy, or for example Sanguine Brace, since it will give you a little critical strike chance here and there. I'm also still using Undying because I think it's a really good bonus that we can use together with our Imbiber that gives us bonuses to damage while we are staying healthy, and I think with Undying here we can stay healthy much easier. It's still a really good bonus. It can also counter such things as poison, and will make sure you're always on the full life. So I really like it. If you want to use something else instead, you can look into Sanguine Brace again, or you can go for Moonrise if you are using basic attack as a generator. Since I'm not really doing that, I think Moonrise is not really mandatory here, and we can go with Undying instead. Alright, so talking about Abattoir of Zir, there's like a few different options that we can encounter for the build. First, I'm going to use a Grandfather, and I think Grandfather is a pretty strong option for Abattoir, mostly because it gives you maximum life. And with a Necromancer like Bone Spear, we will have issues with survivability for sure. That way we can use the Grandfather, get some maximum life, and really good damage bonuses as well. So with the Grandfather there comes a few different choices that could be changed, depends on the situation. You can use Ring of Sacrilegious Soul. It's a really good ring, mostly because you can get like maximum life, lucky hit chance, and pretty much get cool bonuses such as automatic corpse explosion and corpse tendrils. That way you will need to open your abilities and use corpse tendrils right here together with corpse explosion instead of the basic attack. I think out of the all abilities that we currently have, dropping the basic attack should be the most easiest way, like how to make the build stronger. So we will still have Blood Mist and we will still have Decrepify. So changing the ring, I would drop the one with the aspect of Serration. I think Serration is pretty good, they're like good bonuses, but it's still not perfect. So if you are going to use a Sacrilegious, you need to drop Serration. Otherwise, we also have a few different options in terms of helmets and pants. When we are talking about the pants, we will have T-Bolt's Will, and T-Bolt's Will is a really good way how to improve both the damage and resource management. So if survivability will allow me, I will try to use T-Bolts inside my build for Abattoir of Zir as well. But talking about the helmet, I think the armor is not enough with the Deathless Visage on. So the attack power is good, but unfortunately the armor is not enough. Therefore I'm going to use the armor helmet, like this, that got like total armor, maximum life and maximum essence together with cooldown or intelligence or something like that. And I'm going to use the aspect of Shielding Storm on it, because it's a really good aspect and it will help with survivability significantly. That way, if I'm going to use it, I will have 11,000 of armor and I will have 20,000 of life. I think it should work pretty great. However, if we will need even more survivability, we can use pants like that, with damage reduction from claws and total armor as well. So if I'm going to use such pants, the armor will reach like 12,000, and I think it will be even better. Therefore, if the new Glyph will provide enough damage, I'm going to play the setup like that. So without T-Bolts and without Deathless Visage. However, I think that T-Bolts is more important than Deathless Visage, and if I will need to change like one item, I'm going to use T-Bolts there. If survivability will be alright and monsters will not hit pretty hard, I'm just going to use Deathless Visage as well. I will fall to like 9,000 of armor, still with Disobedience, so with Disobedience it will be much higher, but it should pretty much work. Also, if I will still need like basic attack, then I will probably drop the Sacrilegious Soul and use Circle of Serration instead. Therefore, there should be a few different setups, and I will be able to change those setups based on how Abattoir of Zir is going to be and how hard it's going to be, in terms of both durability and the damage of the build. So for now, I think I will focus on something like that. So T-Bolts are staying, I'm not using the Visage, and I'm using Sacrilegious. But first thing to drop, I would say Sacrilegious, and then it will be like that. All of those setups should work with the Grandfather. Also, there's like one change. If I'm using the Grandfather, I prefer to use the Bone Sacrificial for
your golem, because we really need this basic attack speed to ramp it a little higher. I think it will work better on Abattoir of Zir, especially with the grandfather setup. Talking about Tears of the Blood, I think the best board for it right now is Flesh Eater. So right here you can just get Tears there, move Kerparil down there, and drop Imbiber completely, since we don't really need it most of the time. Therefore Kerparil goes here, and Imbiber goes out. That way we can use Tears of the Blood here, and we can take a lot of points around. To get all of those points, we could pretty much drop all the stuff that we don't really need, that we don't really use in most parts of the builds, like a little additional house bonuses, like drop some damage bonuses as well, like Deathbringer for example, all that part. We can drop Stifle too, it's not that important, and just stack a lot of stats right there. I think it will be the strongest way to play it, and it should work pretty good. So for the start of Abattoir of Zir, it should look somehow like that. So with all stats in, and we can pretty much drop like this Bringer, or we can drop Hardened here with some dexterity, and that's pretty much it. So we have all the stats stacked there. And after we will get Tears of the Blood to the higher levels, we will need to drop like additional bonuses as well. But it will be alright, we can just get rid of some armor here, for example, if survivability will be alright. We can get rid of some stats here or some dexterity here to get even more points in. However, this will be pretty much a really strong start and will be sufficient to kick off your build to the Abattoir of Zir.
So that was my Bone Spear build, which will perfectly work for all types of content currently, and I'm going to take this one to the Abattoir of Zir as well. There could be like different changes that I already showcased when we're facing harder content, so build should be pretty flexible, and you can pretty much tune it down or tune it up to your own needs and make it work how you like it. It could work both with like two-handed weapons, with Grandfather, it can work with wand and focus, it can work with wand or sword and limbless wall and stuff like this. There are like so many options right now. And I think in terms of flexibility, out of all Necromancer builds, Bone Spear should stay on top, since the skill itself is pretty strong and pretty flexible. I hope you enjoyed the whole video.